You've said that whenever we cook, we become practical chemists. So my question is, are you always cognizant of the chemistry and the biology of the food that you're cooking, or do you allow artistry to take over sometimes?
Or just habit. I mean, I'm not a culinary artist, so in my case, it's just a matter of getting on with it. That kind of information is kind of in the background for me, but if I have to get dinner on the table in an hour, that's the last thing on my mind.
Yeah, normal life just takes over, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go right back. You published On Food and Cooking in 1984.
Yeah.
So what's that, 41 years ago? And I mean, it revolutionized the way that the cooks at home and chefs thought about cooking. Um, I'm interested, what was the sort of literature like before that? Who were your influences and who was doing great things in the kitchen that maybe inspired the work?
Actually, I should explain just very briefly that the idea of writing this book was kind of a desperate measure. So I had trained to teach literature, poetry in particular, and I couldn't get a job. And so this was a fallback. And based on just conversations with friends of mine, we would get together for potluck dinners and drink wine and that kind of thing. And one of the things that would come up frequently was, why did this dish not turn out? Or if somebody spills some wine, how can you save the tablecloth? That kind of thing. That just kind of registered subconsciously with me. And when I had to figure out what to do with my life, I thought, well, maybe because I had some science in my background, maybe I could write a book about that kind of thing. And I went to the library and discovered that there was a huge technical literature on the subject of the chemistry of food, but really not a whole lot in the way of popular accounts or accounts for cooks. And there were maybe at the time two books that I can think of. And one was a Q&A kind of book, and the other was, so if you didn't ask the right question, you didn't get the answer. And then the other one was really written for, I don't know, 20-year-olds or something like that, just very, very basic. Uh, so I saw an opening and took it and lucked out with the timing because at the time there wasn't a whole lot of information on the subject. And also food was not that big a deal. So it took a while for that to change. And when it did, my book was kind of waiting in the wings for people who were interested.
And what about getting a publisher to actually pick this up? Because it's an enormous book. I know the second edition was bigger than the first, but nevertheless, the first is a tome. So how do you get a publisher to agree to something like that where there's no sort of reference point in the literary space besides the couple of books you mentioned, no great demand for it, and this is going to be something of a magnum opus of a book?
Well, I really lucked out on that score. So just through the grapevine, a publisher in New York City heard about the fact that I was thinking about writing a book like this. I hadn't even really begun. And he was kind of primed to be interested because he was the, I guess, third generation of a publishing dynasty, Charles Scribner the third, or was it the second? I've forgotten now. Anyway, his interest was in popular science writing, very different from his grandparents and parents who had published Hemingway and Fitzgerald and people like that. And so he heard about this idea and he actually contacted me. And so I had to do very little work actually
Wow.
convincing a publisher to publish. At that point, it was really just an idea. And I'm not sure that he realized, or nor did I realize that in the end it was going to be a tome. But that's how I got the publisher.
Yeah, I guess the size of the project must have just kept on increasing, sort of like the expanding universe phenomenon that, as you see more, then it gets even bigger, right? Because it's such an enormous topic.
Yeah, that's it, and I didn't really appreciate that, I'd dabbled in a few subjects in order to think that I could really put together a book on the subject, as a whole, but, when it came time to, getting down to, fermentation for breads and alcohols and so on, yeah, I realized I'd gotten myself in pretty deep.
Yeah, I mean, there's entire quite big books written on those subjects, and when you've got to have that as well as all the other topics that are covered. When did you get a sense, or did you have any sense that it was going to be quite revolutionary in terms of cookbooks?
I, at the time, really didn't think that because my sense was there are the professional cooks and there are the home cooks. Professionals already know how to cook, and they've, been apprenticed and, have years and years of experience. They know how things work. So maybe amateurs who are kind of interested in science, but also like to cook, maybe that would be the main audience that I had. What I didn't realize was that the professional food world was slowly changing, and the new generations of cooks were not satisfied with just apprenticing and being told, do it this way because that's the way it's done.
Mm.
And so with time, I began to find a professional audience as well. And I think that's now the main audience that I have.
Yeah. So, what has surprised you most about your career trajectory? Did you ever expect to be in the position you are now?
No, in fact, when I finished the first edition of On Food and Cooking, I thought, okay, I've done food. Now it's time to do something else like the weather or gardening or something like that. But then there was enough interest, surprising me and the publisher, that I decided to go ahead and stick with the subject. And fast forward 15 years or so, and the interest had really exploded, and I was glad that I didn't shift my focus.
Yeah. I want to talk about the second edition, which came out 20 years after the first, I believe.
Yes.
We'll get to that in a little bit, and then maybe talk about what a third edition might look like, if you're up for that at the end. Um, but before we get into that, I want to drill down into some food chemistry and ask you some questions that have been on the back of my mind, if that's okay. So, starting with, I guess, something that's very important to cocktails and to drinks, which is bitterness. It's something that crops up in a lot of different mixed drinks. It's sort of the basis, part of the definition of a cocktail. But it's quite a curious phenomenon, isn't it? Because bitterness, as I understand it, is associated with poison, with danger. It's designed to warn us that the food or the drink, the plant that we're eating may indeed be dangerous. And yet we seem to have developed this love for it. We kind of seek it out. We look for it in coffee. We look for it in a Manhattan. We look for it in chocolate, in beer. So how do you explain physiologically this desire to actually have something bitter on our mouth, knowing that it's in high enough concentrations, probably poisonous?
Yeah. So we are biological creatures, but culture took over a long time ago in our everyday life. And I'll just human beings are curious creatures, and an anecdote from my family: when my son was maybe 6 months or 8 months, something like that. He was sitting in his high chair next to our table. I was drinking a beer, and he was interested in the bubbles. And so I just thought, have a little fun, give him a spoonful of beer and see how he reacts. And his initial reaction was horror, and just screwing up his face and making a horrible face. After a couple of seconds, he clearly wanted another sip. So I think that encapsulates the human condition. We have this biological inborn response to a lot of things, but culture overrides it. And if you see your parents doing something and they're enjoying it, and your initial sense is that this is not nice at all, but you're willing to give it another try. And in the case of bitterness, what I would say is that it's a sensation. It's can be a powerful sensation. And I think that's part of the reason why we seek it out in other things, that we don't try to eliminate it from everything, because it's one of the tastes that we register that is interesting.
Mm.
And it used to be a danger signal. It no longer is. We hardly ever in our everyday lives encounter bitter things that are going to harm us. And so it's just become like sweetness or saltiness, a sensory modality that we can play with and enjoy.
Yeah, it doesn't communicate nutrition though in the same way as something like sweetness certainly does. Saltiness to some extent. Certainly we need salt, and acidity as nutrition as well. I mean, there's various vitamins in there. Bitterness doesn't have that though, does it?
Well, maybe it does actually, because a lot of compounds that we sense as bitter are biologically active. Some of them are toxic in high enough doses, but it looks as though bitterness can also be a sign of pharmacological value. So, for example, bitter melon is very popular in Southeast Asia, and it looks as though one of the compounds that causes that bitterness, in fact, has valuable effects on the body. So, what I guess I would say is that bitterness is a marker of um, biological relevance, either positive or negative. If we're diluting things so that it's just a taste and not really physiologically important, then we can just enjoy it for its own sake. But there are probably out there things that are bitter that are useful to us, and that's one of the ways that we can detect it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess traditionally people have consumed bitter herbs, roots, barks, that kind of thing in solution, like a drink, a liqueur, a tonic,
Yeah.
literally tonic water.
Yes.
Of course, cinchona is good for warding off malaria. So there you go. There's one.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any sort of value in using it as a digestive aid? I mean, it's like saliva production, this kind of thing, or is that more astringency?
Yeah, so that's something that's been really difficult to pin down. What is the value of an aperitif
Mm.
or a digestif? And so people have actually studied this to see whether they could, correlate the intake of those things with some physiologically relevant process, including secretion of digestive enzymes and that kind of thing. Last time I checked, it was not clear. So I think probably we just enjoy them for what they are.
Interesting. So, in a similar way to how we've grown to love bitterness and sort of value it as a flavor, as a sort of balance to sweetness, for example, um, there's also herbs as well. And as I understand it, a lot of the aromatic qualities of herbs that we enjoy and that we prize in our food and our drink are in fact poisonous, and they're designed to ward off predators in high enough concentrations. How do you sort of view that we've evolved to exploit these as prized flavors as opposed to find them disgusting?
Well, so I think what you have to do is think about the biologically relevant context for these things. So, the flavors of mint leaves, we enjoy them a lot. But if you imagine yourself as a caterpillar and you're small, and that's your sole source of nourishment rather than just an accent and a drink, then it's going to be a very different story. And those molecules, which, like the bitter molecules, in reasonable doses don't bother us at all, At high enough doses, they're really obnoxious. If you do the experiment of, taking a sprig of rosemary and chewing on it by itself, imagining you're a caterpillar, it's nasty. But flavoring a stew, very different story.
Mm. So are you saying that evolution on the part of these plants, these herbs, didn't account for the scale of potential predators, i.e., humans are much bigger than caterpillars, and also cooking?
Well, I guess what I would say is that they have actually co-opted us on that score. There's probably a lot more rosemary in the world than there would have been had we not adopted it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So culinary herbs are it's a great example of our taking advantage of them and they're taking advantage of us.
Yeah, I love it. And then just continuing along this sort of line of things that you would think might harm us or are designed to be painful or detract us from consuming, but we've learned to enjoy. Can we touch on bubbles for a second? Because bubbles, it's CO2, it sort of triggers a mild pain sensation, and yet there's this sort of masochistic desire to consume fizzy things for most of us. How do you explain that? I guess it's sort of sits along somewhere alongside capsaicin and chili, right? There's this sort of desire to have a little bit of pain, but not too much.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say in the case of carbonation that you have to jack it up pretty high before it's really painful. So what I would describe it as is just a sensation, a touch sensation that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So it gives kind of another dimension to texture
Mm.
in your mouth. There's the smoothness and the silkiness and maybe a little bit of weight from glycerin or something like that.
Mm.
But then carbonation brings just another dimension. And again, it's human beings interested in sensations of all kinds. It's just entertaining. It doesn't have to be painful. It can be on the road to pain, but maybe not all the
When
way.
it goes up your nose.
Yeah, yeah.
What's the mechanism there for the actual sensation of carbonation in the mouth? Because I've heard, I mean, you would think it's the bursting of the bubble, but I've also heard that it's a pain sensation from carbonic acid that's in there. What exactly is going on when I feel that prickle on the palate?
Yeah. Actually, there's no consensus, no scientific consensus on exactly what's going on. There are people who have staked out positions about which of those aspects is the most important. But I guess my sense is that one of the things that makes it such an interesting sensation is that there are so many different things going on at the same time. I mean, there's the release of carbonic acid, so there's acidity involved. There's the popping of the bubble itself, and I don't think anyone's really looked at that carefully. That would be a touch sensation. There's something that bumps up against your tongue and then explodes. I don't think we yet have a good vocabulary for describing exactly what the chain of sensations would be that our brains are reacting to.
Yeah. You, I'm just thinking with a mousse or something that's got air whipped into it, which obviously has a very low concentration of carbon dioxide, it's a very different sensation. And I guess the bubble size is different too. It's not moving around like a carbonated beverage, the carbon dioxide bubbles do,
Yeah.
but it's a completely different sensation. It's often soft and velvety as opposed to aggressive and spiky.
Yeah.
So it feels like the carbon dioxide is playing a crucial role in the carbonated beverage sensation to me.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. All you have to do, I think, is consider the difference between Guinness with its nitrogen gas and a standard beer with CO2. The feelings are very, very different.
Yeah. But as to your point, it is amazing how bubbles provide structure. Like if you try a drink that's supposed to be fizzy and let it go flat, it's a completely different experience. It doesn't work. I mean, Coca-Cola is probably the most prevalent example of that. Everyone's had a sip of flat Coke, and it's awful, you know. Or indeed a bottle of club soda that's gone flat. There's obviously a taste to it as well. You get that carbonic acid flavor without the pairing of the bubbles, and so that in itself feels weird because it's not the flavor of normal water. But yeah, that structure it provides is incredible to drinks that are supposed to be fizzy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like champagne as well is another one. I mean, flat champagne is the most disappointingly sad thing in the world, apart from the fact that it's expensive and no longer drinkable. It just is. It's just a disappointment, isn't it?
Well, I think that's part of it. You know, these drinks, whether it's Coke or champagne, they've been engineered for a particular kind of experience in the mouth, and those experiences include bubbles and the release of acidity. And so, if you know an important part of that engineering has gone missing, then yeah, it's not going to be the same.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Talking about wine, sort of as we're talking about champagne. So entropy tells us that things become more disordered over time. And yet with wine, we have this phenomenon where I make my wine, I put it in the bottle, I let it sit for decades, and it resolves itself into something that seems to be more harmonious, more structurally sound, and more interesting and more expensive. How do you explain what's going on inside a bottle of wine over these long periods of time?
Well, I think thinking about the aging of wine, entropy isn't that useful a concept, and the reason for that is that it first of all, it's a closed system. So you know what happens inside that bottle, and entropy is a kind of uh, sort of universal process, things tending to disorder, but that's in the universe as a whole and not necessarily in a particular
Sure.
closed system. So there's that. And then the other piece of it, I think, is that uh, as the wine evolves, it probably is becoming more disordered, but that's not a bad thing when it comes to flavor. So, you know, you can think of a wine very freshly made, and it's juicy. You know, it's alcoholic and juicy, pretty two dimensional. Let it sit around for a few years, and the alcohol and the acids and the esters and all the other molecules that are floating around in there begin to react with each other, and you end up with something that it turns out, no guarantee that this would have been the case, but it turns out that the end result of all that kind of mixing and reacting is much more interesting to us than the initial conditions.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the time I think sommeliers or wine people who drink these long-aged wines, they have the viewpoint that this was what the wine was always supposed to be, and it was just waiting to get there. And yet, as you say, it's actually moved further away than from fermented grape juice that it was when it was first made. Um, and I suppose, you know, these long-aged wines and indeed barrel-aged spirits, after decades, it's then you start to get these characteristics that have no right to be in a bottle of wine or in an aged spirit. Tropical fruits and leather and tobacco and all these things that have nothing to do with grapes or barley or whatever it is. And yet they are more enticing to us for some reason. Perhaps it's because it's so weird that they're there in the first place.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big part of it. I think it's just human beings are interested in complexity, and we're interested in difference. So you know, if our expectations are surprised, that gets our attention. And if there's something going on in a bottle of grape juice that doesn't seem to belong in a bottle of grape juice that reminds us of leather or animals, that gets our attention. And again, provided the balance is good, it can be a real delight.
Yeah. Um, I want to talk a little bit about seasoning, salt, sugar, acid, um, bitterness, maybe. What is going on when I season food with salt or with sugar? I mean, I know from a sort of bartending background, sometimes if a cocktail is lacking a bit of fruitiness, you just put a bit of sugar in there when I was young and we used to get strawberries, we used to sprinkle sugar on top and it just tastes more strawberry-ish.
Uh,
Salt does this incredible thing with sweet and savory food, but obviously more appropriately with savory food. It brings out the flavor of a piece of fish or a piece of meat. And yet salt intrinsically has no flavor beyond saltiness. It seems to elevate the aromatic qualities of these dishes as well. So what on earth is going on here?
So it seems to be a combination of two different things, two very different things. One is purely chemical. So salt is sodium chloride. It dissolves in water to form ions, which are electrically charged. Most of the aromas that we enjoy in food are molecules that are not electrically charged. And so if you make the environment that they're in electrically charged, that makes it uncomfortable for them chemically, and so they tend to evaporate. They tend to fly into the air because that's a more hospitable chemical environment than the food or drink itself. So that's one aspect. You add a little bit of salt, and that'll drive aromatics out and make them more available to us to smell. The other thing is psychological. So we grow up eating and drinking and developing expectations, and we tend to think of, for example, vanilla and sweetness going together because that's the way we experience them. And so often what can happen is that if you elevate sweetness or vanilla in an ice cream or something like that, people will actually experience the other of that pair as also elevated because they kind of go
The
together.
association is just so strong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, yes, that makes sense. There's a sort of psychological association because in nature, the two are paired so commonly. And I guess in culture as well, if you always associate vanilla and ice and sweetness because you've had a lot of ice cream, then that also makes sense. Your other explanation about sort of volatility and creating a hostile environment, that is fascinating. You're basically stimulating the aromas of this food or drink up into the atmosphere, and so you get a stronger, it's literally smells stronger.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So talking about smell, I've got this long, and you've maybe partly answered this actually, I have this long running debate with friends about whether or not you can smell sweetness. And I would also throw acidity, bitterness, and saltiness and umami into that mix as well. And I'm on the side of the debate where I'm like, those are taste sensations. They don't have an aroma, sort of by definition, really. If they did, then they would be tastes and aromas.
Yeah.
And they are on the side of, I think, probably more along the psychology of association. What's your take on it? And if you would be on my side, that would be fantastic.
No, I am on your side. I think,
Yes.
yes, the associations get built so early in our lives. I mean, the anecdote about my son and bitterness and beer. Um, Children have way more taste buds than we do as adults, and they are taking in information and laying down a kind of database constantly of what things go with what and what signifies what, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think association is really underappreciated by, well, probably by everyone, including you and me, because we'll often, I think, without sitting down to analyze carefully, just kind of make that association uh, uh, just in a casual way, eating or drinking day to day.
Mm. Yeah, why do you think, and I guess this goes back to sort of evolutionary biology, why do you think that we are programmed to be so powerfully influenced by environment and association? Because it seems like there are some pretty hard and fast facts in nature about food and nutrition. We know that sweetness is associated with calories. Acidity, I guess, conveys offness or perhaps, balances sweetness to sort of tell us about ripeness. umami, I guess, protein, associational fat, and salts, obviously, and nutritional qualities. That seems to be like all we need to go on. And yet we have this pliability as humans, so that we can end up in environments where we're eating what to one person may be delicious and another absolutely disgusting. Maybe I've answered my own question. Is that it? It's an environment. It's to evolve within your environment.
Yeah, and I think all you have to do is think about uh, this common trope in kind of the anthropology of food preferences, that fire made us human, cooking made us human. There was really no precedent for the flavors of cooked foods in nature, and yet those are the foods or those are among the flavors that we crave. So I think it speaks to the fact that human beings are um, malleable, adaptable. That's why we've been as successful as we have been as a species, and so this is just kind of the everyday manifestation of that we can enjoy so many different things, and in fact, often many of us seek out novelty rather than being afraid of it because we don't know what it might do to us because we live in culture, and culture has kind of pre-screened things for us. We can enjoy things that in the state of nature we probably wouldn't have, at least initially.
Yeah. So there's like a kind of trust that's been built with culture that's filtered out dangerous things, and so then it just becomes a matter of preference. And I guess what you're saying about seeking out novelty is the sort of hedonistic side of being a human to some extent. To try this, it's new, or I'd like to experience the flavor from that culture. Do you think there's limitations to what we're happy to eat? Do you think there's certain cultures that are never going to like certain foods, or do you think anything can be learned?
Well, I think in principle anything can be learned, but given a particular human being and their database and what they've come to enjoy and not enjoy over their lifetimes, I think that also has a huge bearing. So there are foods, fermented animal products, for example.
Shark springs to mind.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, that can be challenging for people who haven't grown up with it. And in fact, even in those cultures that develop those things, it's nowadays a minority of people who actually seek them out and enjoy them. So,
yeah, I guess because they're not so dependent on it for a source of nutrition, because they can trade with other nations and grow things all year round, or get other people to grow things all around and import it.
yeah,
Whereas once upon a time, the Icelandics may have relied heavily on fermented shark to give them protein through the winter.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you tried the fermented shark?
I have not, and that's on my list.
Just buy a bottle of ammonia and open it and sit near it for a while
Okay.
whilst chewing some gum or something, and you'll get the. Yeah, I tried it once. I was in Reykjavik, and I wanted to try, all the sort of local dishes. Puffin is one of them. I think, is it whale? They eat minke whale or something like that, and the shark. And it was quite hard to get hold of the shark, actually, as you say. Like, it's not widespread, the consumption of it anymore. They eat a lot like the rest of the Western world eat. But we found a place, and I got given this slither of it. It was like the size of a fingernail. I was like, how bad can it be? And I started chewing on it. The texture was horrible, for starters. It was sort of sinewy and rubbery at the same time,
Uh-huh.
very chewy. And then initially I was like, well, it doesn't really taste of much. And then the ammonia starts to kick in, and it's vile. Like, I mean, you really would have to be pretty desperate, I think, to sort of be like, right, we'll pack some of that down for the winter months and crack into it.
Yeah, yeah. I'd never thought of this before, but ammonia is a basic uh, molecule, chemically speaking, which means if you consume it in an acidic environment, then it becomes less volatile.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether in the kind of historical, cultural consumption, there were ways of toning it down by having something.
Vinegar.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it would neutralize the alkaline, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe I should have done that. It's
Or-
like not quite the same, but jellied eels in London is a sort of traditional dish. That doesn't have the ammonia thing, but they'd put vinegar on that. Texture also disgusting, flavor not great, but you have to put enough vinegar on it so it basically just tastes pickled, and then it's just about palatable. What are some of the foods or drinks that you've struggled with over the years on your travels? Anything that stands out?
Well, along these lines, I guess the one that stands out would be surströmming,
Oh yeah.
which is the fermented herring, fermented in the barrel and then fermented in the can. And the way you tell that it's a good can is that it's blown up like a football, which otherwise is a very bad sign. Um, so just opening the can, in fact, is a challenge. You need to point it away from you so that you don't get sprayed, and then the contents are they make an impression.
Yeah, the videos go viral on the internet. I've seen people doing it. I've never had the pleasure of trying it. Did you manage to eat it okay? Or
Yeah, so with many of these things, the smell is worse than the flavor in the mouth because, and I think that has to do with the function of the sense of smell for us as animals. It's a way of detecting danger around us, among other things. But once we've decided to put something in our mouths, then it kind of takes a backseat to the integrated taste plus smell sensation. And so taste becomes more prominent, smell gets dialed down. And the same kind of thing with, an Epoisse cheese or something
yeah,
like that, which you can smell from across the room. But when you actually take a bite, it's not that bad.
yeah, 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 yeah. So that physiologically, there's something interesting going on there, I guess, in the brain, but perhaps even orthonasally and retronasally, because the body perhaps can detect what's the air that's coming in and the smell and ambient smells and the air that's in the mouth. And then and there's a sort of almost like a reed switch there by the olfactory epithelium that is saying inside mouth, outside mouth, inside mouth, outside mouth. And then it can switch between the two and then create an image of that flavor that's appropriate.
Yeah, yeah, and that's been demonstrated by brain recordings.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's you'd never think so much complex biology is going on there. I mean, obviously that's just the start of it, right? There's also creating these sort of flavor images and then relocating all of this back into the mouth, even though a lot of it's going on here and it's
yeah.
going on around you. It's just incredible. Um, Speaking more about aroma, actually, because your latest book, I think, Nosedive, 2020 was that one?
Yes.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
is focused entirely on aroma. In it, you say, when we smell something like a rose, the rose briefly becomes part of us. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's literally the case, and writers in the past have said this kind of metaphorically, but it turns out to be grounded in reality. That when you smell something, what you're doing is detecting molecules coming from that thing. And in order to detect them, those molecules have to be bound by our receptors, which are sitting in our noses. And so the receptors there waiting to be triggered. And then a molecule comes along and it grabs onto it. And for the millisecond that it's grabbed onto it, that molecule is part of us. It's taken in by the receptor, and uh, the receptor then sends a signal to the brain that it's detected something, and then it lets it go. So it's a very brief encounter, but it's the momentary integration with our biology that makes our perception possible.
You don't want to think about that too much when you're in a public toilet, do you?
No, and just realizing that there are all kinds of things in the air that are that we may not be detecting. There may not be, salubrious.
Yeah. So is the attachment of the molecule to the receptor always fleeting, or I'm thinking about smells that hang around. Is that purely due to a sort of concentration of it in the atmosphere, or in some cases do we hold on to molecules longer and give the sensation of a longer lasting smell?
I'm not sure that we actually know for a fact about that. I may be wrong, but my sense is that these events are so transitory that it's really difficult to know outside of taking a smell receptor, putting it in a petri dish, and then seeing what happens there.
Mm.
Maybe it's possible to record and know. Um, but there are, on the other hand, known examples of molecules that block our taste by binding onto receptors and preventing those receptors from responding to other things. And so that may also be the case for the sense of smell, that
Mm.
there are interactions between the receptor and the molecule that are so strong that they temporarily block that receptor from being able to detect anything else.
Mm. Yeah, miracle fruit springs to mind as a taste modifier.
Yeah.
You can have some fun with that. I remember doing a dinner party with it once, and it was just an awful mistake. It just ruined everything, particularly the wine, actually, because you lose that acidity and structure. And it's fun doing it. I remember doing it with, what was it, Marmite? I think we tried, and it ended up tasting a bit like Guinness. Sort of sweet, slightly smoky. It was that acidity, and the Marmite was gone. And yeah, coffee does something similar, I think. Yeah, it's weird. It went through a bit of a trend, didn't it, about 20 years ago, and I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, yeah, there's, miracle fruit and, what's the other one? Gymnema. I forget what the common name for that is, but that blocks bitterness.
Oh,
Um, and, so playing around with those things, is really interesting, exactly because they don't make anything nicer. They just make us realize how important balance is and how much we depend on getting, a full report from our senses of the foods and drinks that we enjoy in order to enjoy them.
yeah, it gives you a bit of respect, doesn't it, for the importance of all of these senses in enjoying food and drink. Just going back to, we were talking about sort of smells lingering around. I come from the world of spirits and cocktails and wine as well, and oftentimes spirits are prized for their length, the length of flavor. Take a sip on this whiskey that's 25 years old, and a minute later, something's still lingering around. Now, obviously, I've swallowed that liquid. So, what explains its pervasiveness in terms of smell and taste?
Yeah. Again, this is something that I think is sort of frontier sensory science. It's what makes the really great ones great,
Yeah.
right? That persistence. And I think it's not really well understood. There are molecules that tend to stick around on our oral surfaces, our cheeks, our tongue. There are also molecules that kind of hang out in the back of the throat. And there's a wonderful report by one of the pioneering wine chemists, Emile Peynaud, who noticed that um, sometimes you would have a sip of, I think he was tasting Sauvignon Blanc, and maybe a minute or two after he tasted it, he said there would be this kind of return as he exhaled of the kind of sulfury cat pee
Mm.
qualities, which indicated to him that there was a kind of constant release of those molecules, perhaps by enzymes in our saliva and in our digestive system. And So these molecules are constantly. It's not like we have a sip and then everything goes down the hatch and there's nothing left. There are residues, and there are residues not just in our mouth, but back behind the throat, and they can come back again as we breathe in and out.
So there's this sort of continuous distillation, really, of these aromas that's going on inside the mouth. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting that for spirits anyway, the length seems to come with longer aged products. So there's something about the chemistry of those that allows for this slower release of these compounds up into the nose. Maybe we should do a paper on it. Speaking about aroma and spirits, there's this incredible phenomenon in spirits where you take, let's say, a whiskey, could be a rum, cognac, or in fact a gin or a vodka for that matter, and you add water to it, and it changes the aroma of the product. Now, I think intuition would say, well, if I add water, it's just going to smell weaker because there's a lower concentration of everything in that liquid. But that's not what happens in practice. Oftentimes, new aromas become apparent and other ones are overshadowed. And this happens all the way down as you dilute more and more. It's one of the reasons why spirits are bottled at particular strengths, because at that strength, that ratio of alcohol and water, it highlights particular characteristics of the product. But what is going on here?
Yeah, so it has to do with the chemical environment of the flavor molecules in the spirit. So um, most aroma molecules are more like alcohol than they are like water, and so
In their size, you mean?
in their chemical nature. So size also, because water, of course, is a pretty small molecule, just 3 atoms, and aroma molecules are, they can be a dozen or more. But what's important is the fact that water is a highly polar molecule. It's got a positive and a negative end. Aroma molecules generally are not polar. And so in an environment that is highly polar, those nonpolar aroma molecules want to get out into the air. It's a more friendly chemical environment for them. High alcohol spirit has a lot of alcohol in it and less water. And so the alcohol is helping to keep a lot of those aroma molecules happy in that spirit. When you begin to add more water, you make those aroma molecules less happy to be in that environment. And that's why you end up forcing more of them into the air, which we experience as more aromatic. So they're getting into the part of the environment that we can actually experience and enjoy on its own more than when they're in the spirit. And when we take a sip of a spirit, of course, it's a very powerful flavor. Our senses are being distracted by all those other things that are going on, like the burn of the alcohol, for example, or the mouthfeel. We pay less attention to the aroma. So if we can drive more aroma into the air so that we can enjoy it and nose it before we actually sip it, then we're going to get a much more defined experience of that aspect of the spirit.
It's a little like one of the mechanisms you mentioned in seasoning then, in a way. By adding water, you're almost like adding salt or sugar and making a less hospitable environment for the aromas, and so they vacate into the atmosphere.
Yes.
So adding water to spirits is basically like seasoning a spirit, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. For enjoying it on its own. Yeah.
Interesting. I've theorized that one of the reasons why holding an alcoholic beverage in your mouth and moving it around a little bit is oftentimes quite enjoyable from the perspective of appreciating flavor and flavor development is because while it's in your mouth, you are drip feeding it dilution in the form of saliva and changing its ABV and then liberating different molecules from the liquid as you go.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's going on. I think what's also going on is that because our mouths are lined with saliva, and saliva is essentially a solution of proteins. The proteins are binding certain things and not binding others, and so they're changing the balance of flavors that we can detect. And so, yeah, it's another it adds another dimension to the enjoyment of a sip of a drink.
Any preferred drinks from your part? Do you like spirits? Do you drink whiskey or rum or mezcal?
It's kind of like my preferences in food. I love the variety more than any particular thing. So I've got, bottles of almost everything, and I'll just kind of rotate depending on what I've had recently, what I feel like that particular moment. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
You don't have to pick a side. I'm exactly the same. I like the variety as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, just sort of another point on aroma. As I understand it, certain aroma molecules, the smell changes quite a lot depending on the concentration. So what in lower concentrations can be, and perhaps you can give some examples of this rather than me just rambling on, but in lower concentration might be quite pleasant. In high concentration can turn a little bit disgusting, perhaps. What does that mean? And then there's the interaction between aroma molecules when they are present together. Different ones can create sort of specific sensations. I'm interested in what that might mean going forward into the future for science and attempting to create artificial aromas of specific styles of nature when it's so complicated in order to be able to define exactly what constitutes a smell, because there's these different concentrations and different combinations of aroma molecules. Will it ever be possible, do you think? Smell-o-vision.
Well, smell-o-vision, yes, because there what you're dealing with is the known universe of smells, and trying to replicate a handful of relevant ones for a movie theater or whatever it might be. When it comes to the universe of possible smells, there are now groups that are working in exactly that space. One particular company called Osmo is really doing interesting work in. So chemists talk about chemical space. There are the molecules we know, but then given the atoms that they're built out of, what are the possibilities out there that our particular corner of the universe has not explored? And that chemical space is huge because, there are maybe 10 or 15 important elements for human life, and the numbers of permutations and combinations you can put those into is enormous. So I think we're at the point at the moment of realizing that there is tremendous potential in that universe that has not been explored by life on Earth yet. But we're still kind of getting to grips with what that means. And what I think one of the important limitations is that we are biological creatures that evolved on this planet with, this set of aromas and smells and flavors and so on. Anything really outside of that space to us initially is going to be really weird. And so the question is, can you come up with something that's both new and weird, but also somehow compelling and interesting? I think that's a tall order.
Yeah, so we're talking about novel smells here, really, things that don't exist in the natural world through any combination of preparations that we have currently managed to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like alien smells, basically.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
What's the intention of? Is it just for sort of out of sheer curiosity that this is being investigated, or is there a kind of sense that maybe, I don't know, someone can sell more goods by making it smell a certain way, like optimizing smell?
Well, so that's the way to uh, commercialize the research that
Sure.
would then
That's
be
how you get the
more
funding, right?
exploratory. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So Osmo, for example, is working on molecules for perfumery.
Mm.
And also molecules, for example, one of their more interesting projects was to ask the question, since we now kind of have access through AI and high throughput chemical analysis and so on to this universe of smells and molecules that we haven't played with before. Maybe we could find in that universe a molecule that would repel mosquitoes that wouldn't be as toxic as the current insecticides. DEET is not good for us, but that's the best molecule we have these days. So if you can engineer a molecule specifically to bind to the mosquito smell receptors so that it can't detect that we're there,
Mm.
that would take care of a huge public health problem in the world.
Yeah.
So there are those applications as well as the kind of more immediately hedonistic ones. What can we enjoy that we haven't enjoyed before? There are big practical problems that are out there ready to be solved, I think, by that kind of technology.
How much do we understand about the brain chemistry of smell, the mechanisms that take place, and I guess sort of leading on from what you're talking about, novel aromas, being able to kind of hack that in order to stimulate particular responses from aroma?
Yeah, well, I think for better and for worse, it all starts with the smell receptors. And so nothing is going to get into the upper reaches of the brain without them. And we have a limited number of them, around 400. The possible permutations and combinations of molecules that they can detect is huge. I think that's where at least the initial exploration is going to be, is if you can um, come up with molecules that trigger different permutations and combinations, then we'll have a window onto what happens in the brain itself when it's presented with something it hasn't been presented with before.
Hmm. Is there any kind of logical mapping of the receptors? You say there's 400. It's not that many, right? I've heard it described as like a QR code, right? So different ones being triggered. You can imagine this sort of dot matrix type thing. Can we map it like we can the genome and say, right, we know that when these regions or this combination of receptors are triggered, then it elicits this kind of smell response? Or is it all just far too confusing and mysterious to us?
Well, it's at the moment, even 400 doesn't sound like that many, but it's still too complicated.
When you
uh,
when you factor in 400, 2 to the power of 400 combinations, it's a
yeah,
lot, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so what people are doing is essentially screening those 400 receptors for whatever molecules they might respond to. So, and there's a wonderful terminology that goes along with that. Receptors whose function is still unknown are called orphan receptors. And what people try to do is to de-orphan the receptors by finding the molecules that they actually bind to. And so that's a slow process. A lot of receptors have been deorphanized, but there's still plenty left to go. And so I think it'll be a while before we have a good map of the possibilities that are afforded by our just a couple centimeters squared of space in our noses.
Yeah, I mean, what is the scale of a single receptor, and how do you go about observing what it's up to? Like, that sounds quite invasive.
Yes. Yeah, no, you don't. You can't really see the receptors themselves. They're molecules,
Yeah.
so they're really tiny. So what you do is you set up assay systems where if they respond to something, you have a way of detecting that response, and then you can make conclusions about what's happening.
Okay, moving back sort of towards food more. Um, we often throw around the term balanced a lot when it comes to food, when it comes to drink. And I'm wondering what your sort of definition of that is. What is when we describe a dish as balanced? What do we really mean? What is our reference point for what balance is in food and drink?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that really depends heavily on experience and expectation. So, chefs and bartenders pay a lot of attention to balance, and the rest of us, I think, notice when things are out of balance, but otherwise, you know, we just kind of enjoy what we enjoy. So I think, a good working definition is simply that it's a um, a formulation in which no particular sensation is especially prominent relative to the others. Um, Sometimes you actually want to highlight one thing over another, but when it comes to balance, what you're doing is trying to get things so that um, uh, everything makes an impression, but it doesn't distract from the other impressions that you're having.
Hmm, not too spiky in one way or another, unless you're expecting it to be a bit spiky.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of it's cultural, then a lot of it is expectation. But it's interesting. So there is no real basis for balance other than environmental conditioning, what you're expecting.
Yeah, environmental and yeah, experience.
Mm.
Expectation comes from what you had in the past. It's a judgment that draws on your database and what you know is possible, and how that compares, how what you're experiencing in this moment compares to those possibilities,
Mm.
that kind of thing.
I mean, I often thought that a lot of cocktails, I guess, reference fruit for their balance. You think about a ripe apple or raspberry or plum, and actually that balance of sweetness and acidity in what we consider to be ripe in that fruit maps pretty well onto like a sour cocktail or a fizz type cocktail where you're kind of replicating that sweet sour effect using sugar, citrus juice usually. Um, and then obviously you've got the aromatics of the alcohol and whatever else going in there, the lengthener, the mixer. But you're really using fruit as your kind of reference point, which is pretty universal, right?
Yeah, that's and I'd actually never thought about that quite in that way, but I think that's true that our uh, in in the world of flavors that we would have experienced before we had expectations, fruit would have been both the most ripe fruit would have been the most balanced and also the most complex because what happens when a fruit ripens is that it's initially usually very sour and without much aroma, and then when it comes to ripeness, the sugars come out, the acids go down, and the aroma blooms. And so that I think speaks to our heritage as mammals.
Mm,
The fruits have played on those senses in mammals for many, many millions of years before we showed up.
yeah,
So
for
they're
seed dispersal and yeah, reproduction.
yeah,
So you can say that cocktails and indeed some desserts, anything that is sort of has a likeness to ripe fruit, is really dictated by plant biology that's been going on for thousands and well, millions of years. There you go. That adds some weight to the next cocktail you're going to consume, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. But on the other hand, then you think about a whiskey cocktail, which has very little, if any, of that going on. And so
Like an
that's
old-fashioned, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yes, there's something else there, isn't there? I mean, I think it goes back to that bitterness thing that we talked about near the start, that kind of slightly desirable bitterness, and then of course there's the sweetness in there as well to kind of offset it.
And complexity. So, yeah, I think that's one of the important things that fruit taught us is to appreciate complexity. And so, yeah, if a whiskey cocktail tasted like nothing but wood, then that would not be so interesting. But
Yeah. Yeah. Wood's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we seem to have exploited it for these sort of vanillins, the tannin, some of those oak lactones, which I guess, reference to as often, vanilla and breast milk and all this kind of thing. But a lot of those, all those sort of sweet, very delicious aroma molecules, or associated aroma molecules. And it just so happens if you prepare a barrel in the right way and you put a spirit in there, it extracts these things out. And it's not really woody as such. It's more the certain characteristics of wood.
yeah, 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 yeah. The coconutty lactones in the oak and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do often think like with spirits, we're almost trained. I need to be careful what I say here. I'm not supporting children drinking, but candies you get in the candy shop as a kid, so many of them have concentrated forms of these flavor compounds or aroma compounds paired with sugar, and it's almost priming you for spirits. And this is why a lot of the time, like when I write tasting notes for whiskey or rum, I often end up referencing candies and sweets from my younger years. Partly, I guess, because actually they they're quite a powerful reference point because it's formative years and very sort of stimulating environment and times of this retreat and everything. And so they really sort of register and hold there in your memory. But also because it's literally the same aroma molecules that are present in those candies that are being pulled out of a barrel or being generated during fermentation.
Exactly.
What about smoke? I guess this is another one where it's culture and environment, I suppose, but it's another example of something that I would imagine historically, even up until quite recently, one would presume, could be a sign of danger, of threat. And yet we've co-opted it, exploited it into our food and drink. And it's now become this, some people, I mean, just live off barbecue food, and or peated whiskey or whatever it might be. And of course, some people don't like it, So how do we explain that?
Yeah, no, it's completely true that for humans in our stage of development, the smell of smoke can be really bivalent. It can be the pleasure of barbecuing in the backyard, or a fire Christmas time in the fireplace, or as we've experienced here in San Francisco, when there are fires in the wine country and the wind blows the wrong way, it's scary. So yeah, it's one of those things where the molecules are the same, the contexts are totally different,
Yeah.
and so our response is completely different.
Yeah. I think I saw somewhere that you grow your own tea. Is that correct?
Yes.
How's that been going for you? How long have you been doing it for?
Let's see. I planted the plants maybe 15 years ago, and I let them grow without, harming them for a few years. But they're now kind of almost chest height for me, which is convenient for trimming. And I now get several harvests a year. In fact, if I'd known you were going to ask, I would have brought some leaves with me. And it's great fun. I've discovered that the tea plant really grows anywhere. It's now being produced commercially in upstate New York, of all places, which is a cold, and in parts of the UK as well.
Yeah, not
And
far from me in Cornwall, they're growing it. Yeah.
yeah. And it's just terrific fun. And for me, it's the kind of everyday demonstration of the alchemy of the universe, because take these leaves and pluck them between your fingers and put them in the sun, and they wilt, and within minutes they smell like something totally different. And then you can manipulate them in all kinds of ways to get very different kinds of flavors. Green and oolong and black teas are just a matter of taking those same leaves and doing different things to them. So yeah, it's a wonderful, um, yeah, just everyday demonstration of the alchemy of the universe, and something that you can kind of do with one bush and enjoy it a few times a year, and give some to your neighbors, which is what I do. And yeah, it's wonderful.
Are you processing yours into all those different types of tea, oolongs and blacks and greens and everything? Do you go through all these? Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what I feel like and how much time I've got, because some are more time consuming than others. But yeah, it's yeah, just great fun.
Are you able to like be self-sufficient in terms of tea in your household, or do you still have to go out and buy some?
Well, so the range of flavors that I can get, just doing it in a kind of casual way, is not what you can get in a fine Longjing green tea from China, or some of the mountain oolongs from Taiwan. So I still love those because they're kind of benchmarks of what's possible. But it's fun to kind of play.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna get into it, I think. I've got some space where I might plant some, because they're a camellia, aren't they? And I've
Yeah.
actually got like ornamental camellias growing in the garden, so hopefully the tea bush will be okay. I think altitude is normally associated with quality, isn't it, in tea?
Yeah, it is. I My sense is partly because the stress of growing in dry conditions, high altitude, all sorts of different things, including, in fact, being nibbled on by bugs, gives you a particular flavor, which is prized in some Taiwanese teas.
Are the bugs come and nibble it with stress of the plant, and then the new um, flushes or actually a higher quality because it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah, exactly,
Huh.
exactly. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't remember the name of that particular tea, but it commands a premium because
Yeah.
your yield is reduced because of the damage, but the flavor you get is really wonderful.
Sounds nicer than the Kopi Luwak coffee,
Yes.
which is goes through the digestive system of, as it's some sort of ferret weasel creature, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a civet.
Civet,
I
that's
think.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Which is absolutely disgusting, and that stuff that commands a high price for no real reason other than I guess it's a bit of a messy job collecting it because the coffee's not great.
Yeah, yeah,
It's novelty purposes
exactly.
only, I think. Yeah. What else do you grow? Do you grow any other ingredients? Do you garden?
I do have a garden. As of just a couple of years ago, I have a greenhouse now. San Francisco is not the kindest climate for a lot of things, but I did, inside my house for many years, grow vanilla,
Mm.
um, which was really fun because you have to pollinate the flowers by hand, and then you get to see the pod develop and then harvest it at different stages. When you buy commercial vanilla, it's actually immature vanilla that's been handled in such a way as to maximize the production of the vanilla aroma that we associate with it. But it's a fruit. And so if you just let it sit on the vine, it turns brown and then black, and kind of like an overripe banana.
Mm. Is it
And
fermenting at that point?
no, it's just
Dry.
yeah, or not even drying. Just that's part of
Right.
the ripening process. Yeah, and then if you harvest that and have it fresh, which is what I was able to do, it's still recognizably vanilla, but it's also fruity. And it just has a flavor that it doesn't have if you've been processed in the usual way.
Right. And how are you consuming that?
As simply as possible, because I wanted to kind of preserve the aroma that it had. So I would just make a vanilla cream or sometimes an ice cream. Just kind of scrape the insides out at the very last minute as it was already beginning to come together. Yeah, yeah.
So when you say commercial vanilla, they handle it in such a way so as to increase the vanillin and vanilla associated flavors. What are they doing to it exactly?
So they pick the pods green, and then it goes through what they call a sweating process. So they bundle them together and then put them in a box and make them sweat. They prevent them from drying out by putting them in the box, but the temperature is pretty high in there, and so they're kind of it's kind of a forced ripening that has the effect of sort of maximizing the reaction of the vanilla flavor precursors and the enzymes that will liberate those precursors and make the vanilla flavor.
Got
Yeah.
you. What's going on in your greenhouse? I should say I have a greenhouse. It's massive. 'Cause I bought a house a few years ago that came with a somewhat rundown greenhouse, which I wouldn't go as far as to say developed. I've just patched up some holes. But it's huge. And so I was like, what am I going to grow? And not knowing the kind of yields that I was going to get from these plants, I mean, I had so many tomatoes this summer. We were giving them away, selling them. My daughter was doing like a car boot sale and she was selling them. And obviously we ate a lot of tomato as well, and we've still got it in the freezer. And similar results with bell peppers. Courgettes I struggled with. What are you growing?
So I'm growing citrus trees. It's very difficult to get limes to grow in San Francisco, but my lime tree is very happy, and so I'm happy. I love the flavor of lime, and I have a Meyer lemon tree. I also have a couple of citrus relatives, but they're not proper citrus. One is the curry leaf tree.
Is that a citrus relative, is it?
It is. It's in the same family. Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't produce fruit though, or does it?
It turns out if you grow it in a greenhouse, it does.
Really?
Yeah. And they're really interesting. They're tiny. They're, maybe a centimeter long. They turn completely black when they're ripe. But before they turn completely black, you can see the little dots of the oil glands. And it's kind of hard to describe the flavor. It's kind of like curry leaf flavor, but with a little bit of sweetness.
Sounds delicious.
Acidity. Yeah, yeah. No, unfortunately, it's maybe 10 in a season, and they're tiny. So I haven't figured out a way to do much other than just pop them in my mouth. I also have another oddball citrus relative, a Sichuan pepper tree. Which is currently the fruits on it are currently ripe, and
They're a citrus relative as well, are they?
Yes.
Are they? I thought they were related to daisies in some way, because there's that strange sort of. Perhaps you can actually unpack it for me a little bit. What is that sensation of Sichuan pepper that's kind of cool, kind of spicy, kind of? I mean, it's sort of trigeminally weird, right? It sort of goes well beyond normal, what you'd call taste parameters. There's something kind of about it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a little bit like I think taking a 9-volt battery and putting it on your tongue. You get that buzz, that electrical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually part of the sensation, part of what it does uniquely. And it is related to, I think they're called Sichuan buttons.
Yes.
The little daisy-like things.
This is
from
why I
South
thought it was related
America.
to a daisy, because I've heard them called electric daisies before.
Yeah, yeah. And I think they probably are in the daisy family. I think they're from South America. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, the Sichuan pepper tree, makes these little fruits that, again, they look like oranges. They've got the oil glands in the outside, and you pop them in your mouth, and you get this strongly citrusy, and then a taste sensation I have not seen talked about that much. To me, I think it's triggering the sodium receptors, the salt receptors. To me, the flavor is very salty,
Mm-hmm.
buzzy,
Mm.
as you say. Yeah, electric.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
weird.
yeah.
You don't want too much of it, I don't think. But then again, maybe you can condition yourself to love that.
Have you been to Sichuan?
I have. I
Yeah,
have been
and
to Sichuan, yeah,
uh,
Chengdu,
yeah.
and
So
eaten the food there. And I mean, it's great, but you got to have it's balance, right? You got to have the balance there, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Whereas just eating a Sichuan pepper is not that much fun.
Well, the hot pots there
Yeah.
famously have the Sichuan peppercorns just kind of swimming
Mm,
around, and you have to kind of strain things out of the liquid to make sure you don't get them.
yeah, the hot pots. I remember putting some pretty unusual, well for me, food in that congealed blood,
Yeah,
brain,
yeah,
probably from a pig, I guess, but I'm not sure. I think I had some stomach or intestine as well,
yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing.
And rabbit heads?
Oh, I've not had that, no.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Damn, better go back. I missed out on that. The head of a rabbit. What's it like eating one of those? I can't imagine there's a huge amount of meat on it.
Yeah, exactly. So I had the great pleasure of being able to visit a number of places, including Chengdu, with Fuchsia Dunlop, the British food
Yeah.
writer on the foods of China, and she in fact has spent years in and around Sichuan, and so she took me to this kind of roadside or street side place that only did rabbit heads, and they were just sitting there on the shelf.
Everyone's got their specialization, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the rabbits have, these large teeth, kind of a fearsome looking skull. And what you do is you nibble on them. You just kind of put on gloves and then kind of tear them apart and get whatever you can out of them. So it's quite an experience.
There's something about eating the face of another animal that it crosses a line for me, I think. As a,
Uh,
I like meat and especially wild meat. But when you're eating a face, I think it's another thing entirely. Especially a fearsome one with big teeth. But then maybe I had it coming.
well, it just looks like a skull, essentially. So yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right.
not so bad.
Is that the weirdest thing you've eaten?
It's right up there. I mean, sea cucumbers are pretty strange, but not that uncommon in Asia. Uh, yeah, that's probably
So at the start, I mentioned 40, 43 years, 43 years, no, 41 years since you published On Food and Cooking. 20 years later, you did a revised edition, which I think was nearly double the size, right?
it was yeah, double the words.
Double the words.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Because I guess when books get that big, you have to start shrinking the text and making the paper thinner and all this sort of thing, right?
Exactly.
Ends up being like Bible paper, just so you can cram it all in there. And I mean, that really expanded it on the topic. I think you included a lot more sort of global food culture in there.
Yeah.
So we're another 20 years on from there. If you were going to do a third edition, what would be the new additions to that? And would you be able to lift it up?
Well, in fact, I'm in the early stages
Wow. Cool.
of a new one, and yeah, it's going to be a challenge because in the last 20 years plus, there's been just an explosion of information on the one hand about the foods I'd already written about, and then an explosion in the foods that back then we had not heard of that have become prominent. So I just have a whole lot more to cover and the publishers have said in about the same space, at least for the print version. Maybe there can be an online expanded edition, but we have yet to cross that bridge.
So does that mean you need to edit down your existing stuff from the second edition in order to make space for new?
Well, what I am doing is so far is kind of rebalancing things. So things that may have been more prominent back in the day are less prominent now, and there are other things to take their place. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we'll look forward to it. So, a quote for you. Nicholas Curti said in 1969, "It is a sad reflection of our civilization that while we can and do measure the temperature in the atmosphere of Venus, we do not know what is going on inside our souffles." Now, I'm not entirely sure that Curti was correct, because I think we do have a pretty good idea of what's going on inside our souffles, and maybe even had an idea not that long after souffle was invented. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But the sentiment is interesting. We, as a race, are exploring the depths of physics and biology and chemistry, and yet it feels like there are some things, and we've touched on it now, today during the conversation, that we still don't really understand about food and drink and the psychology of flavor, the mechanics of flavor. So what for you are the most interesting, exciting frontiers of flavor chemistry and flavor science?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that we've gotten better and better at surveying what's around us, what the possibilities have been for human beings to enjoy in the past with travel and then communication and so on. We just know the world of food, or the Earth's possibilities much better than we did 20 years ago, 40 years ago when Nicholas was speaking. Um, what we don't understand, I think, is what's going on inside us as we enjoy those things. You know, the Star Trek said space was the final frontier. I think the final frontier is actually between our ears, and so understanding how it is that we enjoy this universe of flavors that planet Earth has evolved for us, and that um, places like Osmo and other people exploring the universe of flavors that we have not experienced yet. Um, that's yet to come. Um, in fairness to what Nicholas said, we he could explain as a physicist what's going on inside a souffle, um, and then explain that to cooks. But at the time, in the 60s or 70s, cooks were just being told, do it this way because this is the way it's always been done. So they really didn't understand at all, which meant that they didn't really understand that even within the term souffle, there's a universe of possibilities. And, where you choose to stop the cooking gives you a completely different set of textures. So anyway, we still have plenty to learn about the ingredients and about the techniques and about new techniques, and so yeah, the fun continues.
Yeah. All right, some quick fire questions just to finish up. Why, and maybe these aren't going to be that quick. They're quick questions, maybe long answers. I don't know. Why do some cheeses melt and others don't?
That has to do with the proteins. So when you turn milk into cheese, you're basically concentrating the proteins, removing a lot of the water, and making the proteins form a network. And depending on how you treat that network with the ripening microbes and other things that are involved, that network can either be strong or not, susceptible to being broken down or not. And so that's what makes one cheese meltable and another not. Yeah.
How do heat and time conspire to make certain cuts of beef toughen under some circumstances and fall apart under other? What's going on there from a chemical level or biological level?
Yeah. So, yeah, the cooking of meat is one of the cook's greatest challenges because there's a pretty narrow window in there where if you're cooking it at a high temperature, which is what we're usually doing, we have a small window of time during which the proteins are enjoyable and not over concentrated. And that's the difference between medium rare and overdone. But there are examples, and that includes tough cuts of meat, where you actually want to cook them for a long time to break down the proteins, not just to coagulate them, solidify them, but to break them down. That takes a long time. But in the meantime, you don't want to overdo the cooking of the others. And so that's when you use low temperatures, long times, and you can end up with something really nice.
Yeah. Okay, final one. For the rest of your life, if you have to forego just one taste and amplify another, which would it be? Salt, bitter, sweet, sour, umami. You're going to lose one and elevate another.
Ooh, I can kind of do without sweetness, so I think that's what I would lose. Um, well, and of the others, I would say umami is the one that you can find most widespread. So it would be an interesting, upping of the volume in
Yeah.
a number of different foods.
Yeah.
But it's also easy to overdo it. So
That's true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, teaspoon of MSG
yeah,
is not that nice. Yeah. It's interesting. I think actually most people would probably actually lose sweetness, even people with a sweet tooth, because the idea of losing acidity, I mean, even bitterness, maybe people would get rid of bitterness, I suppose. But then, coffee,
yeah.
that would be awful to
Chocolate.
lose coffee. Yeah.
Although, speaking of coffee and chocolate, chocolate without sweetness, that's
Yeah.
maybe that would have to go.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, when you do like 100% cacao, it's quite something, isn't it? And so devoid or removed from the sort of normal chocolate experience, which is led largely by sweetness, I suppose.
Yeah.
With a tiny little bit of bitterness, or acidity in there. You grow your own tea, you said, but are you a coffee person as well?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I did have a coffee tree at one point, but they're much more finicky and the yields are low.
Yeah, yeah, I have one at home and I don't get any fruit off it at all. In fact, it doesn't really grow at all. It just kind of sits there surviving. Harold McGee, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Tris. It was great fun for me too.
Cool.